For centuries, humans have been growing alongside our botanical brethren. Our histories have mixed and mingled to bring us modern medical marvels, faded folklore, and everything in between. Of course, in order to understand the plant, we have to start with its roots. I'm M. Grubner-Gaddis, and this is Rooted.
Hello, and welcome back to another week of Rooted. This week, we're actually packing up and heading to PlantCon in Houston, but rather than skipping a week, I figured we could do another lightly rooted. And for this one, I just really wanted to focus and do kind of a departure from our standard plant deep dives, just because these really aren't that researched and I'd rather not spread misinformation or lies. But I did want to research a bit more on some animals who maybe also leverage photosynthesis in their own bodies. Because I really just kind of want to know, what is it like to live my dreams of being considered productive by just taking a little nap on a warm rock? What's that like? Anyway, without further ado, let's dig into it. We'll start by just Googling animals that photosynthesize. Okay, it's looking like the first thing specifically is BBC with their science focus section. And the article is just simply, can animals photosynthesize? Okay, and then they said it first, but they stole my line. They said, wouldn't it be great if we could get all of our energy from sunbathing? Nothing's original, whatever. Okay, blah, blah. It's really great. Chlorophyll, chloroplasts, organelles, mitochondria. We've all heard all of these things before. Okay, some animals have managed to harness the power of photosynthesis. For example, sea slugs chow down on photosynthetic green algae, and chloroplasts from that algae become incorporated into their gut cells, where they continue to pump out nutrients long after the rest of the algae has been digested and expelled. And it's called kleptoplasty. All right, science. Guys, I feel like we're not giving today's scientists enough credit for their witty little things that they come up with. To the scientist who's been naming bugs after Beyonce for their whole career, truly are doing the Lord's work. And I feel like kleptoplasty is such a fun little term for, stealing some chlorophyll and just, using it for your own devices. Okay, other animals, including clams and flatworms, are also doing this, but apparently it's a slightly more symbiotic approach for them, where they're not eating and digesting the algae and then continuing that cycle, but instead they're just casually letting them live inside of their bodies. Most obviously, according to BBC, because I didn't know this, coral reefs are doing that. I knew coral was technically an animal with plants in it, but I didn't realize that we could technically classify that as them photosynthesizing. But essentially, for coral reefs, coral contains a very specific algae, and that's what makes them that color. And then during the day, the algae kind of gives it all of the energy that it's producing. And then in return, the algae have a safe place to just hang out, because otherwise, they would get eaten. Potentially by those really adorable slugs. Hold on. Earth-shattering news. We're talking about salamanders. Hold on to your butts. I know we've lightly touched on my love of salamanders on the podcast, but I don't think you guys understand. I have a lifelong obsession with amphibians, really frogs, but also salamanders. And, they evade me constantly, I've never found one in real life, but it's fine. But according to the BBC, and we're gonna look into this, so don't worry, the only vertebrate animal known to harness solar power is the spotted salamander. Apparently, algae colonizes the salamander eggs once they're laid, and then they kind of work their way into the cells, and it feeds those animals from within. And apparently, the more algae you have as a tiny little baby spotted salamander, the better chance you are at surviving that experience and also developing more quickly. But why? Wait, why does the algae want to go into the eggs, though? What's that about? Why did the algae say, Nice little salamander eggs. Would be a shame if someone, made a home in here. We need to find that out. Okay. Why algae evolve to live in salamander eggs? Don't fail me now, science. Okay. Well, now I feel conflicted about if that's technically photosynthesis. So I'm looking at an article from the National Science Foundation, and it's specifically an entire gallery dedicated to understanding the symbiotic relationship between spotted salamanders and this variety of algae. It's saying that the algae provides oxygen for the salamander embryos, and then the embryos are actually what's providing the nutrients that facilitate the growth of algae. So then that's not photosynthesis, and I feel like BBC lied to us. Okay, let's try it again. Symbiotic relationship. Algae salamander. Okay, this is from the American Museum of Natural History. Ew. Okay, I'm just maybe going to read it to you live. Okay, the algae species, I'm going to butcher this, but you guys don't come here for my scientific pronunciation. And if you do, with love, stop. But it's called Ophelia amblystomatis, which I'm kind of obsessed with Ophelia. If I ever have a kid, Ophelia. And then it says it's like having a bunch of green algae in your womb, which is kind of gross to picture, but thank you, Ryan Kearney, from Gettysburg College, for making me think about that. Okay, according to this study that they did, and they published it the day this article came out, it suggests that the algae inside the salamander cells are stressed, and then they change the way that they make energy. So instead of using light to produce food to support the salamander, like what's happening with coral, the algae in salamander cells struggles to adapt. So it's kind of unclear why they're going in there. They don't know. Scientists still don't know why that's happening. But in contrast, the salamander cells are what's this? I don't know, kind of weird. And then they start growing really fast. And it suggests that it's maybe suppressing an immune response. So it knows that it's at least neutral or at least beneficial because their cells aren't attacking it. So basically the answer is that it's not photosynthesis, and we still don't understand why, which is really kind of a bummer for me. I was really excited about the salamanders, you guys. Okay, I've moved on. I've recovered. I've healed a bit. Mostly because these sea slugs are really cute. So go to our Instagram if you want to see them. They kind of look like tiny little baby sheep. I'm sure you've probably seen them on, if you follow science in any way. I used to be really into marine biology, so I still habitually will check things. So I've seen these little guys, but it kind of never occurred to me that they are an animal that photosynthesizes. But essentially, in this article that I'm reading on PubMed, which is where I get a lot of information for the show, they're typically just a collection of peer-reviewed studies and things, but it's a great place to start when you're researching. Highly recommend PubMed. But it's essentially saying that they eat the algae, and it captures the plastids in the algae and holds it in the cell lining of their guts, so really holding it in that tummy. And it provides it with energy and fixed carbon for 10 months. So, and then they can't really transmit them across eggs or anything. So it's not doing what's happening in the salamander eggs. They are instead just living inside of these cells. And then eventually it just kind of passes through as they continue to eat more algae, but their cells don't really attack it in any way. And those algae cells are still providing energy and oxygen in those cells, despite no longer being alive, which is interesting. Let's see. What else should we do? I'm looking to see if there are any more animals. The pea aphid. Who's the pea aphid? Why have I not heard more of that? Okay. This is an article in Futurism, and they have a few points, so we're going to be here for a while, but we might go off on a tangent and come back. The pea aphid is apparently one of the most remarkable creatures, but I've never heard of them. Whoa. Okay, So apparently these tiny little creepy guys with weird mouths can make their own pigment that plays a role in like bone growth, vision, and chloroplast production. So they're like growing their own chlorophyll, sort of, because it helps it to like absorb light and store energy, which is what plants use chlorophyll for. So let's learn a little bit more about pea aphids. What are they up to? And then I promise we'll come back to some of the interesting nuggets over here. We're going to Wikipedia. I understand that it's just a starting point. Okay, apparently they're also called the green dolphin, which just sounds like I can't decide if it sounds like a superhero or a villain, but you guys have to know. Okay, immediately villain, because the next one is pea louse or clover louse. And they're still aphids, so like that's kind of not cool. And it ranks among an aphid species of major agronomical importance. So essentially like they be snacking and it's not good. We're reading about how they're just like normal aphids where they lay eggs in the winter and then hatch in the spring. If you're listening to this when it comes out, be checking your seedlings for aphids. They're out. And the reason they're called pea aphids is because they really prefer anything in the Fabaceae family. And so you'll remember it's not just peas, but it's also things like beans or gorse if you listen to that episode. So although it's anything that is technically in that family, that is one of the larger plant families out there. So not too picky, but they do prefer Fabaceae. Okay, it's the model aphid species. Wow. Interesting. Okay, and it's considered the model organism for aphids because it's really easy to get it to essentially be able to reproduce in the lab. So they're really not too picky about that. So they're just easy to study. Okay, they have symbiosis with bacteria. So they all have a very specific bacteria that's evolved with them, and that provides them with amino acids that are necessary for reproduction. And that is something that's transmitted from mom to baby. Got it. Okay, they're also used to study asexual reproduction, polymorphism. Okay, I'm finding out why they started photosynthesizing. Why they started with the bacteria. It turns out it's because they mostly like alfalfa and pea and red clover and broad bean. And all of those have a lot of carbs, but they don't have a lot of nitrogen. And that's important because when you don't have enough nitrogen, you can be missing some key amino acids that are vital to reproduction. And so that's really where this kind of bacteria comes in, is to give them those essential amino acids that they need specifically to be able to reproduce. Okay, but none of this is anything that okay, it's cool, but I don't care that much about it. Okay, well, we didn't really get into the photosynthesis of it all. Maybe I need to be more specific in my search. Okay, so they can make ATP, which I don't know if you guys remember that from school. But if you don't, it's important for cell function. Don't ask me to recall all of it. Okay, photosynthesis-like process found in insects. Is it all aphids? I'm going to feel so lied to. Aphids may have rudimentary sunlight harvesting systems. Okay, everything I'm learning about aphids is actually horrific. I don't like this corner of the internet. It's making me feel sick. This article is saying that sometimes aphids are born pregnant and sometimes males just are casually born without mouths. And there's a bunch of other freaky things they can do. Now I'm just thinking about aphids too much. Okay. It's prefacing this by saying that most of us need all of these things to function, to maintain our immune systems, to make specific vitamins in our bodies. But most animals, like pretty much all other animals, we're just eating this. But the people who have been studying these freaky little guys are suggesting that aphids actually absorb the energy from the sun and then can transfer it into the cellular kind of systems that they have to make energy. But how? Okay, now we're getting into specifically when they're making ATP. Some of it is going into determining what color they are, because that determines like if ladybugs and other predatory beneficial insects can see them. So when it's really cold, they'll stay green. When it's been like a pretty standard season, they are generally orange, and then white ones are sometimes created when the population is too big and there's not enough resources to go around. So presumably, like, they're not eating enough to have the energy to be able to create that color for themselves. Green aphids have way more ATP than white ones, which is how they're kind of figuring this out. They were like, okay, but what's going on there? Like, why are they white? And then even more ATP is found in the orange one. So that's how they're kind of determining, like, orange is the best. Because typically when animals have the best resources, so you would have the most ATP because they're making it or eating it, but it takes a lot of energy to get. So we know, like, if you have more of it, you have more energy. So that's how they're figuring out orange is best, green is okay, and then white's like, we're not doing so hot. Okay, and then this is how they're figuring out that they're doing it themselves. They moved them all into the dark, and then the ones who were in the light had more energy, and then once they went into the dark, they had significantly less. And then they crushed them, and then purified that chemical, and then kind of showed that you could absorb light and pass energy on through crushing them up. Which, like, sounds like a rough day in the lab, kind of. I don't know. Aphids really ick me out, so I kind of can't imagine this. But that's how we figured it out. I kind of can't read more about aphids. It's an interesting study. This is on nature.com. It will be linked in the show notes for sure. But I can't talk about aphids anymore, you guys. It's making me feel really gross. Let's go back to that futurism article. They're bringing up breatharianism. Do you guys remember? You might not. Remember is probably not accurate. Have y'all ever researched cults? And if so, have you ever stumbled into the breatharianism cult? Which was really just like a fad diet where people lied to everyone and gaslit everyone into thinking that you could survive without food and water. If you just had enough light and air, you would just like sit in a really sunny room and meditate yourself to live. Obviously, a lot of people died, but I'm pretty sure there was like a big controversy around this. Maybe we'll deep dive into that. Because I'm pretty sure one of their founders like regularly lied to people and got caught like ordering food or something. Okay, Wiley Brooks was the founder of the Breatharian Institute of America, introduced in 1980 when he appeared on That's Incredible. And he died in 2016. He said he stopped teaching to devote 100% of his time to solve the problem as to why he needed to eat food to keep his physical body alive and allow his light body to manifest completely. Okay, I think we have to back up a little. We have to back up. Obviously, this is pseudoscience. Everyone's calling that out. I want to remind you guys that please don't do this. Documented studies show that fasting for extended periods of time will kill you. Absolutely. Because human bodies need food to live. Okay, it turns out Wiley What's-His-Face wasn't even the first person to do it. This is why we normally research things more. Rosicrucianism was actually the first diet of this type in the 1670s. And essentially, we don't have a ton of information about this. A physician and occultist, remember when you could be both? Kind of fun. Described as having lived several years by taking only half scrupule of solar quintessence. Wow. So essentially, this man is just saying, like, he fasts for 20 years and doesn't eat anything, and then maybe he'll have like a little small cheese cube or something. But he's just eating sunbeams. And then a monk later came out and said that same thing. You know, we go like long time without eating any food or water, and instead we just like let the sun hit us and we live off of that. But that one was actually more recent. That was chronicled in a 2006 Discovery Channel documentary called The Boy with Divine Powers, which does seem fun. Apparently, this monk didn't eat or drink anything for 96 hours while they were there. And then they've never been able to really verify that, because obviously, like, just not eating while the film crew is there doesn't mean you didn't eat ever. Okay, and now we're moving into another person who claimed to have lived without food or water for more than 70 years. And he did survive for 10 days without food or water, and he didn't need dialysis or anything. So they're like, that's interesting, but it doesn't necessarily mean anything. And the medical team who did his observations didn't comment at all on being able to survive for decades with that. A lot of people obviously were like, hey, sounds kind of fishy. And then a bunch of people who believed him were upset about this. So that one is still unclear. Okay, now we're getting in to the people in breatharianism, which is what I'm most familiar with, but it's still fairly new to me. Jasmuheen, born Ellen Grieve, was a prominent advocate of breatharianism in the 90s. She said she could go for months and months without ever having anything more than a cup of tea, and her body ran on a different kind of nourishment. But then, okay, this is who I was thinking about. Interviewers showed up to her house, and they were like, girl, if you only live off of sunlight, why you got a full pantry? And then she said, oh, it's not for me, it's for my husband and my daughter. Like, they haven't figured it out. They don't have special bodies. They have to eat real food. And then in 1999, she volunteered to be monitored by the Australian TV program 60 Minutes for a week of not eating to show them, like, clearly I'm not lying. And then on the third day, she started being like, this is actually kind of an unfair test because we're in a hotel room and it's too confined and too close to the road. That's, like, really stressing me out. The pollution is making it so I can't absorb all the nutrients from the air. Like, the air is just not fresh enough. And she said that 70% of her nutrients come from fresh air, so she couldn't even breathe or do anything. So on the third day of the test, they were like, hey girl, like, we're not trying to set you up to fail. Totally cool. Let's move to a mountainside retreat. And she kept being sick. So after 4 days, the Medical Association of Australia was like, you really need to stop, please. And according to him, her pupils were dilated, her speech was slow, and she was really dehydrated, really close to like 11%, which is really, really bad for you. You never want to have it dropped quite that low. And her pulse is doubled. So truly, like, really we're teetering on the edge of kidney failure when we're hearing about that. And then they were like, honestly, you guys, this seems like we should all agree that breatharianism isn't real. But she doubled down and said 6,000 other people have done this around the world without any problems. So you just don't know what you're talking about, which is really kind of wild to double down on that. And she claims that her beliefs are based on writings from recently channeled material from Saint Germain. That's really wild. Then she took a blood test. Oh, no. She stated that her DNA had expanded from 2 strands to 12 strands to absorb more hydrogen. And so then someone else was like, oh, really? That's interesting. Here's $30,000. If that's true, why don't you get a blood test? And she said she didn't really understand why she would need a blood test, because she wasn't actually saying that she had developed 12-stranded DNA. She was just saying, like, other people have. You know, like, a friend of a friend has done it. And then as late as 2017, 5 deaths have already been directly linked to breatharianism as a result of the books that she has published, and she openly denies responsibility at all. She says, you know, people should try breatharianism at their own risk. Not everyone is a highly evolved creature or organism, so not everyone's going to be able to pull this off. Like, only the smartest and best of us will. But it sounds like she kind of studied under Wiley Brooks, who was the founder of this here in America, introduced in 1980. That's incredible. Stop teaching. Okay, this is the guy also I was thinking about. He was saying that there were 4 major deterrents to being able to live without food, and that's people pollution, food pollution, air pollution, and electro pollution. So essentially, like, humans are meant to be able to eat light, but we can't because we're so distracted by each other, by the food we've already eaten that teaches our bodies to stop producing, like, food from the air. Air pollution, cities are just too dirty, and electro pollution. ever since we've had electricity, it's too much for our bodies. And so that's why we have to eat food sometimes. And then in 1983, he got caught leaving 7-Eleven with a Slurpee, a hot dog, and Twinkies. And he was like, oh, it's cool, you guys. Like, that's my cheat day. You know, I'm not a perfect human. I never claimed that I was. This is not a regular occurrence for me, but every once in a while I like to treat myself with like a little cheeseburger, a little Coke. Like, who among us doesn't have a cheat day? And people were like, yeah, likely story. He said he did it for balance, which, like, we love the unhinged claim of balance in this kind of diet. Whoa, hold on. This is getting really wild. Okay, this man loved McDonald's cheeseburgers so much that within his cult, he claimed that all McDonald's were constructed on properties that are protected by fifth-dimensional, high-energy, and spiritual portals. Like, imagine loving any corporation so much that you're like, no, you guys, they exist on a protected spiritual plane. I don't have to eat food, but McDonald's doesn't count as food because it's the spiritual higher beings told me it's holy. And then he said, if you really want to be a breatharian, you should drink only Diet Coke, and you can eat McDonald's double quarter pounders with cheese, and you could combine 2 of those if you want into 1 double quarter pounder if you just can't get a double quarter pounder with cheese where you live. So basically, he's like, you can double down and eat like half a pound of cheeseburgers with fries and a Diet Coke, but drinking water is strictly prohibited, and like, we're not going to talk about the fact that you shouldn't be eating any other food. Like, that's the only food you should eat. And then he also has a set of magical 5D words that you should be saying while you're meditating. So if you're not eating a double quarter pounder with cheese and drinking a Diet Coke, you should just be saying these 5 words, and like, that will nourish your soul. This feels very interesting. And he was charging people like $100,000, and he could have made up to $50 billion to be... Oh no, he would charge that. Okay, well, I don't know who he's charging $50 billion to. And that's for his immortality workshop. But of course, he had a payment plan, you guys, don't worry. It was accessible. That is so interesting. There are a few other people who have claimed to have done this, but no one quite as interesting to me, no one as much of a character as Wiley Brooks. And it seems like in more recent histories, the people who are claiming to be able to do this aren't necessarily preaching it as a lifestyle the way those other 2 were. They're kind of just saying, like, I'm a special person and I can do this. And sometimes it's tied to their religion and sometimes it's not. But they're really not. It doesn't seem like they're pushing for people to necessarily believe them or not, other than for the notoriety for themselves. But they're not asking anyone else to be a part of the lifestyle. Which, like, speaking of lifestyle, do you guys remember early 2020 when TikTok was telling all of us to drink chlorophyll water? What even is chlorophyll water, and what were the supposed benefits of drinking chlorophyll? Okay, we're going to chlorophyllwater.com, just because they'll be, I'm sure, leaning into the trend, giving us exactly what they're saying. First ever bottled water in the U.S. to pass Clean Label Project certification. Okay, but the Clean Label Project, don't even get me started. It's not a real thing. That is just another greenwashing tactic designed to make you think they're being really upfront on your supplements. If you see something that's a supplement that has approval from the Clean Label Project, just know that the founders of that company paid good money to greenwash you. Okay, their tagline is a healthy outside starts from inside. And it's saying this contains chlorophyll, mountain spring water, vitamin A, B12, C, and D. Okay, I understand it's for skin care. Chlorophyll is a powerhouse ingredient worthy of its enduring appeal. In our bodies, it works as a great oxygenator, helping our red blood cells to take up oxygen, which makes them work more effectively and energetically for good overall health and good things that come with it, including radiant skin. Okay, they have a page titled 5 Legitimate Benefits of Chlorophyll. And immediately after this, we're going to read a scientific study. It says, it's a natural deodorizer. It supports detoxification. It promotes blood health and function. It's good for your immune system. And it supports healthy skin. Okay, but how are we putting just chlorophyll in the water? Like, what is that about? Is it just like green juice light? Is it just the remains of green juice? Let's click on liquid chlorophyll from their webpage. Always a good sign when it just redirects you to the press page. That's always really comforting to see. What about our process? Okay, we're just getting redirected to our in the press page a lot, which is kind of concerning. Let's just search let's find a scientific study. Scientific evidence of chlorophyll being effective in these ways. Existing studies suggest that these photosynthetic pigments and their derivatives possess some therapeutic properties. They're antioxidants, anti-genotoxic, anti-cancer, which is just probably the antioxidant bit of it. Okay, so essentially we don't have any evidence that can directly prove that consuming chlorophyll is truly that helpful for us. We haven't really isolated it or been able to isolate it enough to repeat studies to prove to us that chlorophyll does have any significant health benefits, but it also doesn't pose any significant risks to your health. So if you've been enjoying your chlorophyll supplements, I'm definitely not here to yuck your yum. We just don't have a ton of sufficient evidence yet in our studies to know that these companies aren't just selling you a bunch of false claims. But if you're enjoying your chlorophyll supplements still in 2024, more power to you. Although this is also saying kind of what I suspected, where a lot of this would just be byproduct from the green juices and other things that the supplement industry is constantly pumping out to us. So it's not necessarily that they've found some kind of interesting way to isolate just chlorophyll, and it is instead them finding smart ways to repurpose food waste. So if you're like a home juicer, if you wanted to, presumably, you could just toss a bunch of your leftover greens, kind of that pulp that's left over from juicing. If you just chucked that into your dehydrator and ground it up, you would have a greens powder that would essentially be doing most of that same work for you as any kind of expensive AG1 or other supplement would be. So if you're already doing that, if you're already juicing at home, that would be my suggestion to you, because it doesn't seem like there's any significant difference here. But with that, I think we'll go ahead and conclude our deep dive into animals that photosynthesize, as well as how humans have tried to claim we could photosynthesize or otherwise benefit from chlorophyll. I know this is kind of a non-conventional episode for you guys, so I am going to go ahead and make a playlist of all of the different spring blooming plants that we've already covered in case you're missing that kind of fix. But like I said earlier, we're heading to PlantCon. So I'll be spending a lot of my time next week kind of editing out that kind of content for you guys, and I'll be back soon with another plant for us to properly deep dive on next week. See you then!
Until next time, be kind to yourselves, be kind to the earth, and just like a plant, drink your water. If you liked the show, please subscribe and consider leaving us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else you listen. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram at rooted.pod. We're finally updating regularly on YouTube at rooted.podcast. And you can check out our website, rootedpod.com, for transcripts, updates, merch, and so much more. The show is written, produced, and hosted by me. I'm Grebner Gaddis, edited by Kat Fren of Fren Diagram, and our theme music was written and produced by Eric Cluxon. Rooted is a Henbane Media LLC production.